Okay, colleagues, good morning, and I hope we're live. Let me double check. Is it working? Is it working? Okay, colleagues. Yes, it seems to be working. Excellent. So, I want to continue what I think is a wonderful tradition of reading articles from Stanford Encyclopedia of Philosophy. Always a good idea. Always a good way to start one's day, right? And I wanted specifically to read an excerpt from Stanford article on Aristotle. So specifically on Aristotle's Politics. Now, the article in general is slightly more technical, and the discussion of Plato, I think, is maybe a bit too hard for our purposes. But I did want to talk about Aristotle specifically because the article by Richard Perry that we read last time focused mostly on ethical issues and less on political issues. And I wanted to sort of rectify this today. Also, I cannot resist. You see, some people say that communism has been tried and failed. And I want to say, no, communism has been tried and succeeded with flying colors. Think about what we're doing right now. I mean, Aristotle's books are publicly available for free. And the article by Richard Perry, and now the article today by Melissa Lane of the Princeton University, also available for free on the web. And I am reading, right? This is, for me, a conscious choice to spend my day off. I don't have classes. You presumably don't have classes. I mean, some of you may be watching because you want to get a better grade. And that's part of the university experience. But I'm sure also many people are watching simply because they want to understand, which ultimately, should be the aim of our courses in the university. Not everybody takes it that way, and our system is maybe not yet perfect. Could use some improvement, but again, I think the ideal goal of our time together is to get you to think for yourself, for your own sake at the end of the day, not for the sake of the grade or not for the sake of any kind of future political career, or I mean, career or career in general, CV, that kind of thing. Anyway, I'm sorry. Let's go back to the article. So the article is on ancient political philosophy. Gives a very nice overview of all sorts of theories, starting with the sophists, and talks about Thucydides a little bit. But let me go back. Let me jump right into Aristotle. So Melissa Lane, thank you very much, Melissa Lane. The two Platonic themes of superior political knowledge and of political participation, which is particularly expressed in the laws, also structure the political thought of Aristotle. So we are talking about superior political knowledge, but also political participation. Now, in the later dialogue called The Laws, I am tempted to do another video on that, but we'd spend forever on Plato if we did that. But Plato in The Laws opens political offices to all citizens, not just to the philosopher kings, the way he does in the Republic. Anyway, let me continue. So Aristotle studied in Plato's academy as a young man, researched there for many years thereafter. Aristotle lived much of his life as a resident alien in Athens, close to the Macedonian court, which brought Athens under its sway, right, which began to rule Athens towards the end of Aristotle's life. And Aristotle at once thematized the fundamental perspective of the Greek citizenship of equals. Greek citizenship of equals. And I think equality is sogoria. I think equality before the law, right? That would be the Greek term. Citizenship of equals, and at the same time acknowledged the claim to rule of anyone truly superior political knowledge. Superior political knowledge. Again, difference in emphasis between Plato and Aristotle. Both talk about political knowledge, but they understand political knowledge differently. While building on Plato's project of demarcating political expertise and depicting ideal as well as imperfect cities, so Aristotle will talk about ideal, but also the imperfect cities. The advances and new directions that Aristotle pioneered in political philosophy reflect certain disagreements with Plato in their wider philosophies, though also with some deep commonalities. So there are deep commonalities between Plato and Aristotle, but also some disagreements. The most important commonality for us is this idea of superior political knowledge as a proper title to rule. So who should rule? The one who has superior political knowledge. Although, again, Plato and Aristotle will understand this knowledge differently. Okay, so 4.1, Aristotle's philosophical method and ethics. So we're going to talk in a second about a deep connection between ethics and politics. I think I mentioned this in the first lecture. The ancients did not really did not really separate ethics and politics as two separate disciplines. We'll see in a second how Aristotle sees, if you want, ethics and politics as a single project. You can only be ethically virtuous if you live in a politically well-ordered society. So politics and ethics reinforce each other. Good polis produce polis, good polis produce good citizens, and good citizens in their turn substantiate, ground the proper political life. Anyway, provide a basis for proper political life. So whereas Plato's philosophy continually sought a single or small set of unifying truths behind the veil of appearances, Aristotle's wide-ranging researches into what would now be considered the natural sciences, as well as in logic and other areas of inquiry, manifested respect for the opinion of the many and the wise. Okay, so anyway, so for Plato, we're talking about a single or small set of unifying truths behind the veil of appearances. Small set of unifying truths, whereas Aristotle has a respect for the opinions of the many and the wise as a starting point for philosophical understanding in general, but political philosophical understanding in particular. Aristotle's approach likewise manifested appreciation of the multiplicity of forms of knowledge, in particular the cleavage between theoretical understanding of the world and practical knowledge. So we have a difference in Aristotle, but not in Plato, between theoretical and practical knowledge on how to deliberate about acting in relation to whatever could be otherwise. Okay, uniting Aristotle's account of phenomena as different as plants, animals, ethics, and politics was a teleological structure of explanation. So we keep talking about this idea of telos. So biological creatures work to fulfill the realization of their end or telos, a specific way of living, a complete life characteristic of plants or animals of their own kind, which is the distinctive purpose that defines their fundamental nature. So the distinctive purpose, telos, which defines the fundamental nature. Just as human artifacts are designed and used for specific ends, so we have, a knife, and there's an excellence of a knife, and there's presumably, a table and an excellence of a table. So likewise, Aristotle thinks that everything in the world has its proper place, its proper telos, and its proper function. Again, a view that most moderns, I think, do not share, but it's a view important in political philosophy. And some philosophers, like I think Hegel, a neo-Aristotelian, will share this outlook, at least in basic outline. Anyway, so while every human being in acting posits a particular telos as the purpose, making that action intelligible, so basically all of our conscious actions aim towards some goal, this should ideally reflect the overall natural telos of humans as such. The overall natural telos of humans as such. Here, however, arises a problem unique to humans. Whereas other animals have a single telos defining their nature, humans both have a distinctive human nature arising from unique capacity to use language, logos in Greek, to deliberate about how to act, and also share in the divine nature in their ability to understand the internal and intelligible order of the world. So, practical reason, use language to deliberate, and theoretical reason, the divine nature and our ability to understand reason, to use reason to understand eternal and intelligible order of the world. Practical reason is the domain of ethics and politics. So practical rationality is the domain of ethics and politics, the uniquely human domain. Yet the political life is not necessarily the best life, compared with that devoted to the divinely shared human capacity for theoretical reason and philosophical thinking. Okay, so this is a complicated question about the relation between theoretical and practical in Aristotle. Intellectual virtues and moral virtues. I mentioned last time that the way I prefer to solve this dilemma is that if we could be saints or gods and could just engage in philosophy all the time, that would be the first best life. However, that is unavailable to us, so we have to do politics. And unlike Plato, for Aristotle, politics is valuable in itself, whereas for Plato, politics seems to be just a necessary evil that distracts us from philosophy. Whereas, again, for Aristotle, the way that we are, we should gladly and happily exercise both parts of our nature, the practical human rational part, practical rational part, and also the theoretical divine part. Anyway, ethics and politics by way of law. In considering practical reason to be the domain of both ethics and politics, Aristotle follows Plato in drawing no sharp line between domains of ethics and politics. So again, similar. In fact, Aristotle closes his Nicomachean Ethics by remarking that for most people, the practice of ethics can only be ensured by their being governed by law. For most people, the practice of ethics, so being virtuous, can only be ensured by their being governed by law, which combines necessity, compulsion, with reason. So, most people, I suppose, who are not saints and not gods, will need to some extent, be compelled, not against their nature, but compelled in order to help them fulfill their nature, compelled by law. Because for most people, the ethical life presupposes government by law, the student of ethics must become a student of political science, studying the science of legislation in light of the collection of constitutions assembled by Aristotle and his school in the Lyceum. Again, I notice the difference in method between Plato and Aristotle. Plato, so to speak, closes his eyes and tries to imagine the perfect constitution, whereas Aristotle, first of all, opens his eyes, assembles more than 150 constitutions and then tries from them to find what is the best regime and also what is the best achievable regime. Anyway, all but one part, so most of the items unfortunately are lost. A considerable part of the analysis of the Constitution of Athens was recovered from a papyrus in the 19th century. So we are in a better position to some extent to understand Aristotle than Thomas Aquinas was. It's an interesting thought. People in the Middle Ages did not have access necessarily to all of the ancient writings and also did not have access to the wonderful discipline of philology, not necessarily always being able to understand what the ancient philosophers were talking about. Okay, this is a digression, but I think it's kind of an interesting digression. Again, how, as you have seen in your home assignments, Aristotle is not is not an expert on Plato. So I would imagine that George Klosko is a better expert on Plato than Aristotle was. Okay, I'll just leave that hanging in the air. And likewise, Aquinas is not an expert on Aristotle as far as we can tell. Again, he did not even have the writings that we have today. Anyway, so Aristotle's theoretical claims about the nature of politics in the Politics must be understood against the backdrop of his encyclopedic study of constitutions. The legislator whose standpoint is adopted in the Politics needs to have a grasp of the nature of politics as such, and an understanding of the major fault lines in interpretation and practice of politics, and a grip on the structure and characteristic of the specific city for which he aims to legislate. Okay, so this is slightly technical. I suppose we can skip this. At the beginning of Book 4, Aristotle offers a fourfold account of what the expertise regarding constitutions must encompass. So these are the first, that which is best in the abstract. The second, the best relative to circumstances. The third, best on the hypothesis, starting not from true end of politics, but from any posited end, and so looks for means and devices that will preserve any given constitution. And the final inquiry, the search for the form of constitution which is best suited to states in general. Articulates a formal cause that can organize almost any material, any kind of people. Okay, so let's go over this step by step. So the first, the best constitution in the abstract, so akin to Plato's Republic. If you close one's eyes and imagine, if one closes one's eyes and tries to imagine the best constitution in the abstract, this is the first question. The second question, what is the best for any given circumstances? So not in the abstract, but in this particular polis, what is the ideal best constitution for this particular polis? So for this particular Crete or for this particular Carthage. The first one being different. The first one is, best constitution in the abstract. The third, now this is where Aristotle is going to give advice to tyrants. The third, best on a hypothesis, starting from what we have already. Sort of, what is the best policy given that we already have this or that particular regime? So again, so Aristotle is going to give advice on how to preserve and improve even the regimes that he considers deviant or perverted, such as tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy. Tyranny, oligarchy, and democracy are perverted regimes, but they can be made better. And they are not bad beyond redemption. And in general, we keep coming back to this phrase, man by nature is a political animal. So it is better to be a citizen of a tyranny rather than, to be outside of the polis. Anyway, so the final inquiry, the search for the form of the constitution which is best suited to states in general, articulates a formal cause that can organize almost any material, any kind of people. I think that the fourth one probably refers to this mixed regime, but we'll see down the line. The four elements of expertise are not tightly separated in different parts of the text. They are pursued variously, sometimes in combination. Okay, so this is the problem with Aristotle's text. It's not a published document, but it's lecture notes, his lecture notes, or maybe lecture notes of his students, so they're a bit chaotic in this sense. Unfortunately, we do not get a rigorous separate treatment of all four questions. Anyway, so the next point, claims to rule. The politics begins by setting the stage for the first kind of understanding of constitution identified above by offering an analysis of the teleological ends of life and the human capacity for speech, which together support its two most famous contentions, that it is evident that the state is a creation of nature and that man is by nature a political animal. So man, by physis, is a nomos-making animal. And again, it's kind of very interesting. Aristotle says that the state is a creation of nature. Now, human beings have to make the state, but it is human nature to make the state. So it is if you want, it is an artifact of humans, but it is a natural artifact. The same way that an acorn is not yet an oak, but an acorn naturally grows into an oak. Aristotle would say that, maybe humans lived as hunter-gatherers, not yet in a state, but as an acorn is destined to grow into an oak naturally, so the human hunter-gathering communities are naturally destined to grow into states, right? And I would imagine Hegel would say that it is our destiny to naturally grow into the Rechtsstaat at the end of history, which is why I keep, again, referring forward to Hegel whenever I talk about Aristotle. Anyway, while for some modern readers this sentence asserts that political participation is necessary for virtuous human flourishing, others contend that that you don't have to necessarily engage in politics, but to be virtuous, only that a man must literally be a part of the polis and live under its laws. So, okay, this is a complicated issue, and I don't want to really go into this all too deeply. Some commentators on Aristotle think that it is integral to human life to take part in politics, to take turns ruling and being ruled. So this is, I think, would be a Marxist interpretation of Aristotle, that one reason why we have to go beyond capitalism is precisely to allow everyone this possibility to engage in politics firsthand, taking turns ruling and being ruled. Other philosophers, I would imagine more conservative philosophers, think no, it's enough for you to just be a member of a well-organized society, and whether you actually participate in the government, that's not as important. So in either case, as Hannah Arendt, interesting name. In either case, as Hannah Arendt emphasizes, Aristotle's understanding of civic unity insists on respect for human plurality as the condition of political action. So the state, the polis, is a union of people who are different. Respect for human plurality as an end in and of itself. Political diversity, I don't want to say political, but diversity of people in the polis, that people are different, have different outlooks, different constitutions, different abilities, that kind of thing. This is a value in itself for Aristotle. He does not want to impose the kind of unity that Plato seems to be after in his Republic. So anyway, so in Book 2, Aristotle criticizes Plato's Callipolis for interpreting the requirement of civic unity in so extreme a fashion as to have obliterated the properly political domain altogether. So much unity that there is no place for politics. Nevertheless, civic unity is still an aim of Aristotle's ideal virtuous regime, and a limited and the limited Platonic spirit survives in the common meals that this regime would offer to all citizens. So we need some measure of unity, but not too much, but not too little. And again, you have these, in the ideal regime, these common meals that are supposed to bring the citizens together. In another famous contention of Aristotle, a citizen is one who shares in governing and being governed. So again, or also translatable as ruling and being ruled in turn. So taking turns, ruling and being ruled. The Greek dictum of citizenship among equals is presented as an analytic truth, leaving open how such equality is to be conceived in practice. The citizen shares in the administration of justice and in offices. In defective regimes, the good citizen and the good man may come apart. So a good citizen of a bad regime is a bad man. A good citizen of a bad regime may be a bad man. In the ideal case, the good man and the good citizen coincide. Okay, the good citizen of a defective regime is one whose character suits the particular regime in question, let's say oligarchic or democratic, and equips him to support it loyally. So this is important and good, but sort of it's not the best situation. It's second best, if you want. Hence, he may be deformed or stunted by a role of holding or a role of holding accountable officers defined on incorrect terms. So the proper human excellence will be stunted if you are born in an imperfect regime. In the best state, however, the citizen is one who is able and chooses to be governed and to govern with a view to the life of excellence, the best life possible. In such state, the citizens must not lead the life of artisans or tradesmen, for such is a life of ignoble. Such life is ignoble and inimical to excellence. Again, think back to Marx. Part of the reason why communism is possible within, I would say, broadly Aristotelian outlook by Marx is because nobody will have to be an artisan or a tradesman. But due to technological progress, we will all have free time, leisure time, to devote to cultivating ourselves and also to participating in politics. The reduction of the length of the working day is the basic prerequisite of communism. Anyway, which is made possible by technological advancements. Okay, nor that of the farmers, as political participation requires leisure. Here, the limitations and exclusions among actual humans, licensed by the principal formulation of possibility requiring actual realization of human virtue, become apparent. So the limitations and exclusions among actual humans. So in the realistic regimes, most people will not be citizens or will not be virtuous because they cannot, for economic reasons, have leisure. I'm sure Aristotle found this unfortunate, but also in his conservative fashion, he would say it is natural, and that's why nature provides us with human beings of inferior capacities who are suited to engage in menial tasks and not engage in governing. Again, deeply inegalitarian and deeply offensive sentiment, I'm sure, to a lot of people. But at the same time, you can see, that Aristotle's heart, at least to some extent, is in the right place. In the sense that if he saw Marx's proposal for communism, I do not think that Aristotle would necessarily be critical of it. Okay, let me, it's an interesting thought to ponder. Anyway, let me go back to the text. Aristotle recognizes that there are other possible claims, or as it were, titles to political rule. So the only legitimate title to political rule, I would say, for Aristotle, is political expertise. The person, the virtuous person, the excellent person, who knows how to govern best and who will actually govern best, who has the right desires to govern best. This is the person who should rule. But there's also a doubt as to what is to be the supreme power in the state. Is it the multitude or the wealthy or the good, or one best man or a tyrant? So the multitude, think of the strength of numbers. The wealthy, think of their wealth. But probably, in the best regime, it is the good who rule. But in very few states are fortunate enough to have that kind of an arrangement. Anyway, Aristotle develops in particular detail the arguments that might be made on behalf of the many and the knowledgeable one respectively. So the arguments, claims to rule on behalf of the many, or arguments to rule on behalf of the knowledgeable, so the people who have the knowledge. The many can judge, as they did in Athenian dramatic audiences, juries and the assembly, where they judged by voting on the merits of something advanced for their consideration, whether a play and indictment or a speaker's proposed resolution. So again, Aristotle uses the image of a collectively provided feast to illustrate the potential superiority of such collective judgment. Potential superiority of such collective judgment. So sometimes the less educated multitude judges better than one wise person. And this is Aristotle's limited defense of democracy. And other images that he uses is a matter of some renewed controversy. But the lesson Aristotle draws from the various images is clearly limited to vindicating a role of many in electing and holding accountable incumbents of the highest offices, rather than in holding such offices themselves. Okay, so complicated sentence, but it seems that Aristotle would prefer that the many judge the few best men rather than that the many hold offices themselves. So this is why, again, we'll talk about his preference for the mixed regime. So I think Aristotle says this, and I think Machiavelli kind of has a similar idea, that probably the people who should rule should be the few outstanding citizens, and the multitude do not rule directly, but choose among them. So this sounds more like the kind of representative democracy we have today. Rousseau would call this elective aristocracy. Okay. So the many can contribute to virtuous decision-making in their collective capacity of judgment, presumably in assemblies and juries, but not as individual high officials. So not like the Athenian system of choosing representatives by lot. In the contrasting case of the one supremely virtuous person, okay, this is going to be interesting. So we're going to talk about monarchy, virtuous monarchy now. In the contrasting case of the one supremely excellent person, Aristotle argues that such a person has, strictly speaking, no equals, and so cannot be made justly to take a turn in rule, holding office for a time as one citizen among others. Instead, it is right and proper that such a person of unparalleled excellence should rule without the term limits that political offices would ordinarily require. And here we have a quote. If, however, there be some one person, or more than one, although not enough make up the full complement of a state. So again, if there's one person or a couple whose excellence is so preeminent that the excellence or the political capacity of all the rest admit of no comparison, he or they, or this one person or a couple, can no longer be regarded as part of the state. For justice will not be done to the superior if he is reckoned only as the equal of those who are so far inferior to him in excellence and in political capacity. Such a man may truly be deemed a god among men. Men like him should be kings in their state for life. So this would be people, students often ask me about what would Aristotle say about Alexander. So this is what Aristotle would say about Alexander. If indeed it proves to be the case that Alexander exceeds in excellence everybody else, by such an amount that it would be unjust to make him take turns in ruling and being ruled, then he should be made king for life. Notice we're not talking about dynasties; we're talking about kings for life. So at the same time, this sounds what's the right phrase? Problematic, because we tend to not believe in monarchy in modern times. But at the same time, you got to see that Aristotle puts very strong requirements on the monarch. This is not really a defense of the monarchy. This is a defense, in exceptional circumstances, of giving power, but only for life, not to a dynasty, but for life, to one supremely excellent individual. So, is this a defense of monarchy for Aristotle? Yes and no. Yes and no. A defense of monarchy, but this kind of passage can also be used to criticize actually existing monarchies. So very often this is the case, that when a philosopher is talking about an ideal state, their ideal characterization can be used to criticize actually existing states. Say all you like. So students are often inclined to call Plato or Rousseau, let's say, totalitarian, but they are painting an ideal picture. Is this really totalitarianism, or is this some form of actually radical social criticism that can be deployed against actually existing regimes? Interesting question. Let me go back to the reading. On one recent reading, this implies that virtuous monarchy does indeed count as a political regime, albeit in which only one or few of the citizens are eligible to hold the highest office. Yet this argument is left at the hypothetical level. So Aristotle leaves it at the hypothetical level. So he doesn't really give examples. He says, if there was such an individual. Are there really such individuals? That's a separate question. In the absence of such a supremely virtuous, even godlike individual, the formulation of political rule as involving some kind of turn-taking by a large body of sufficiently virtuous citizens remains preeminent. So some kind of turn-taking by a large body of sufficiently virtuous citizens. So what is the best regime for Aristotle? We are talking about the three regimes, right? Monarchy, aristocracy, and politeia. And it seems to me preliminarily that all three can be equally good. But looking at this passage, so monarchy is purely hypothetical. It's hard to say if it really can be realized. So I think that Aristotle, my intuition is that Aristotle would lean towards aristocracy. Maybe. Though even this should not be read to imply that all should in fact alternate in office, or even that all should necessarily be eligible for offices. So again, this remark makes me think that probably aristocracy is what Aristotle would consider to be the best regime. Not to mention that, again, aristocracy in Greek, ariston, means the best. Aristocracy is ruled by the best. As Aristotle turns to consideration of the best constitution relative to particular and imperfect circumstances, the major issue is the conflict between rival factions. And so, we're talking about geometrical and arithmetical equality, and we talked about this. So, Democrats say that justice is that to which the majority agree. Oligarchs say that to which the wealthy agree. So, Democrats say that if all are equal, all should have an equal title to rule. Oligarchs say no, because they are unequal in wealth, they should have a title to rule. And Aristotle says both of them are wrong, because not all are equal. And this is why democracy is wrong. Some people are just better at ruling. That's why he doesn't like democracy all that much. And regarding the oligarchy, he says, if you are best at accumulating money, it doesn't mean that you are best in ruling the city. So both are deviant, perverted regimes. They are not all bad, so they are like overall okay for Aristotle. Again, it's better to be a citizen of a polis than to be a citizen of none at all. But this is like a sort of a careful, conservative, cautious criticism of these regimes. Okay, this attention to the actual political contentions of rival Greek groups leads into a discussion of the relative goodness and badness of imperfect regimes. Okay. Okay. Yeah, so for Aristotle, the important division is ruling for the common advantage as opposed to ruling for the advantage of a single faction. So ruling for the common advantage as opposed to ruling for the advantage of a single faction. The bad democracy, for example, rules for the faction of the many as opposed to the faction of the few, whereas the good democracy, which Aristotle baptizes polity, good democracy, politeia, right? Using the general word for constitution, politeia, rules for the advantage of all the citizens. Aristotle arguments this analysis with appeals to historical narrative overlapping with narrative of Athenian political history offered in the Constitution of Athens. Anyway, on his telling in the politics, Athenian democracy had degenerated from an aboriginal democracy of non-meddling non-meddling farmers through various intermediate forms to a democracy in which men rule, not laws. Which I think is probably a problem for Aristotle, that men rule and not laws. Yet this trajectory does not prevent him from asserting that in general democracy is the most tolerable of the three perversions. Okay, so this is important, because you see, when we talk about Aristotle, what is the best regime? Aristotle probably would say that the best regime, if you close your eyes and just imagine, is probably some form of aristocracy, of the supremely virtuous few. The best achievable regime, as we'll talk about in a second, is a mixed regime between oligarchy and democracy. But of the perverted regimes, the most tolerable is democracy. So it's like, you know, Aristotle is hard to classify in this sense. He gives different arguments in support of different regimes in different conditions. But again, this argument here, seems to align with a famous statement by Winston Churchill that democracy is the worst form of government except for every other that has been tried, right? So here you can see a certain defense in Aristotle, a defense of democracy. Interesting, right? A further major turn in the analysis comes when the question of some single best regime is replaced by a question about not what is best in the ideal sense, but what good constitution that is easily attainable by all and in practice best for most cities. And this Aristotle calls the middling regime. So middling regime or mixed constitution, a mean between oligarchy and democracy, in which the middle class holds the preponderance of both wealth distribution and political power. Thus, it is attainable through reform of either an oligarchy or a democracy, so make oligarchy more democratic or make democracy more oligarchic, the most prevalent constitution among the Greeks. So oligarchies and democracies being most prevalent constitutions among the Greeks. Strikingly, his example of such middling regime is Sparta. Sparta, presented as a case of a characteristically democratic distribution of education, among the citizens only, but still, coupled with the characteristically aristocratic principle of election to offices, rather than the democratic selection by lot. Though, to be sure, democracies such as Athens made use of elections for certain highest offices as well. So in this sense, Athens, for Aristotle, is not a pure democracy, because to the extent that Athenians at times used elections, they were to some extent oligarchic. But again, in choosing between Athens and Sparta, it seems that Aristotelian sentiment is more closely aligned with Sparta. Okay. So the last section deals with Aristotle's influence on later philosophy. I'm not sure if I want to talk about this in detail. Well, anyway, so all modern discussions of citizenship as a non-instrumental good in itself are indebted, if only indirectly, to Aristotle. So all modern discussions of citizenship as a non-instrumental good in itself. So the value of political citizenship for its own sake, again, is, as the article says, is directly attributable to Aristotle. The Politics emphasizes that a state is not a mere society having a common place, but a state is a community of families and aggregation of families united in well-being for the sake of a perfect and self-sufficing life. It has been suggested in this article that the final clause of that sentence is important. Aristotelian citizenship counts as non-instrumental good in itself only so long as it does indeed aim at the telos of a perfect life. So any regime is good only to the extent that it promotes the telos of human excellence, of a good and happy, fulfilled life. Eudaimonia, right? That is, while Aristotle indeed valued the possibility of political participation in office holding and the control of office holding as the part of the best constitution, he saw it as an intrinsic good only insofar as it was an expression of virtue or excellence, as it would be in that best constitution, whether governed by a collectivity of virtuous citizens or in the rare and perhaps purely hypothetical case of a superlatively virtuous monarch. So again, this ideal best constitution, which may be the government by a collectivity of virtuous citizens, or in the rare cases, a virtuous monarch. So again, what is the best regime? Collectivity of virtuous citizens. Aristocracy, politeia, something like that. Without virtue, political participation in office holding and the control of office holding was rather to be valued on the basis of expedience. Though even then, membership in the political community of the polis remains essential to full human flourishing. Membership in the political community remains essential to full human flourishing. Even when, if we leave aside the question of whether you need to actually participate in politics as an office holder, so maybe you just need to be a part of the citizen body. Anyway, nevertheless, so this scholar Ober's observation rings true more broadly for the historical significance of Aristotle's political thought. The medieval rediscovery in the West of the Greek text of Aristotle's Ethics and Politics and their translation into Latin served as a basis for reconceiving civic life as valuable on the basis of reason independent of revelation. So civic life, secular ideal of civic life, of political participation, independent of revelation, independent of, the Bible, right, of religious revelation. Anyway, so translation of Aristotle into Latin symbolizes a fundamental turning point in political philosophy, one in which Aristotelian philosophy would be widely deployed within certain strands of thought of the Catholic Church, while also inspiring a wide range of philosophical movements and later becoming the target of others. Indeed, modern debates over the meaning of Aristotle finds him as a precursor of, or inspiration for, a range of intellectual and political positions. Again, you see, what is the best life? What is the best regime? It's hard to say. McIntyre says that Aristotle is a communitarian. Yeck talks about how Aristotle is an exponent of class conflict. Frank talks about Aristotle as a democrat, or at least as providing the basis for democracy. Ober talks about Aristotle in opposition to Athenian democracy of his day. One interesting development has been the use of Aristotle to articulate an ethics of capability. Martha Nussbaum, very famous scholar. In evaluating Aristotle's political thought, it is important to distinguish between modern democratic assumptions and his own starting points, many of which were in tension with the democracies of his own time. Okay. I'm sure there's a million other things to say and a million comments I could have made, but we finished the article. I hope this gave you some food for thought. I hope this cleared up this very confusing issue of what is the best regime. So like the theoretically hypothetical best regime could be a monarchy, an aristocracy, or a politeia. Again, these three virtuous regimes, these would be the ideal in the abstract. In reality, most regimes that Aristotle sees around him are oligarchies and democracies, and between the two, he thinks that probably democracies are better. But for any given regime, it would be a good idea to make it more of a mixed regime. So if you live in a democracy, make it more oligarchic. If you live in an oligarchy, make it more democratic. Again, this mixed regime based on the rule by the middle class. And if you don't have a middle class, maybe you should first implement some economic reforms, like the redistribution of land, to make sure that you have a middle class. But that's, another hypothetical discussion for another day. Okay, colleagues, let me finish here. But don't worry. We will continue this discussion in meetings to come. So thank you so much for joining me. I hope this was fun and stimulating. And I will see you next time. Most of you I will see tonight when we will talk about Hellenistic political philosophy. Okay, and as always, take care.